In the world of competitive racing, it doesn't take very long before you start scheming how to find a competitive advantage. Power is one of the areas that people focus on to get a little bit of an edge over their competitors. Others try to come up with clever ways to generate downforce. But there is another possibility for finding time, and that is weight reduction. The SCCA has stringent rules about what is allowed for different classes, but if you spend enough time around the street touring Civic community, you will hear the legend of the Japanese-built 1989 Civic Si. The story goes a little bit like this. The year was 1988, and Honda had just launched the 4th generation Civic and 2nd generation CRX. The Suzuka plant in Japan had the CRX and the Civic, while the Alliston, Ontario plant only had the Civic. From the very get-go, CRX had the SI trim level, while the Civic only received the standard and DX trims. But as 1988 came to a close, Honda revealed the Civic Si for the 1989 model year. Right around the same time, the American safety institutes were pushing for increased safety in passenger cars with a focus on side impact testing. To comply with this new test, Honda took the CRX and added additional steel to the doors, as well as door-mounted automatic seatbelts, because studies at the time were showing that nobody really cared to use their seatbelts. The safety improvements added about 120 pounds to the doors, so to compensate, Honda reworked the camshaft to give an additional 3 horsepower. But the doors were already designed for the new Civic Si, so it shipped in its first year with the original style doors without the added weight, as well as the special camshaft making the additional 3 horsepower. This led to 1989 being the golden year for the Civic Si at autocross. Shortly after people began racing the Civic Si at autocross though, they were beginning to realize something a little bit strange. The Civics made in Japan seemed to weigh less than the Civics made in Canada. Some people were claiming that a Japanese-made Civic weighed 200 pounds less than the Canadian model, while others just claimed it was a complete load of nonsense. The consensus, though, is that there were about 50 to 75 pounds at stake by having a Japanese model. The legend has grown in such popularity that some people claim they won't be caught dead with a Canadian Civic. The rumors say that the Suzuka plant had used shells from the 1988 Civics when they were building the 1989 Civic SIs, but some other people say that maybe the Japanese steel is thinner or the Japanese steel is less dense than the steel that was sourced in Canada. As it turns out, I have a 1989 Canadian-made Civic Si, as well as a 1989 Japanese-made Civic Si, and they were both assembled in January of 1989. I also happen to have scales, and I know everything that's been done to these cars, so I can take off all of the parts that are different between the two, weigh them, and finally get to the bottom of it. Got the red car here, Canadian model. Somewhat prepped for STS right now. We've got 2105. Now with the Japanese car we have 2134. Let's check by adding a gallon of water just to make sure the scale's working right. Okay, so it's actually only about 3 quarts, but it goes up by 6 pounds, so it makes sense. Alright, so both of these cars right now have full tanks of gas. I went and just filled them up just before this. But what gives? It looks like the Japanese car weighs about 28 pounds more than the Canadian car. Well, there's differences in the parts between the two, so let's take everything off and weigh them and then compare the differences. So the biggest difference with the Canadian car is that it has an aftermarket header and aftermarket exhaust as well as a cold air intake. The Japanese car is actually mostly stock, although somebody in the past put in this large battery, and I also have the cold air intake. On the outside I have these special edition Civic wheels, coilovers, a front sway bar delete, bucket seat, and the small diameter steering wheel. Here the Japanese car is mostly stock again, just with some aftermarket wheels. Alright, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick. Catback exhaust was a bit of a challenge to weigh. Suspension, front and rear. Wheels and tires between the two. Surprisingly, the Civic wheels stock were pretty heavy. Spare tire, autocross car didn't have it. And then the sway bar, obviously the stock car has a sway bar, the battery. And then the steering wheel, surprisingly the stock steering wheel is pretty heavy. And then the bucket seat was heavier than the stock. I was surprised by that. Then we have the exhaust manifold, surprisingly 10 pounds by going to a 421, and then I just left some stuff in the hatch. So overall, a 17.7 pound difference for the Japanese car. So with all the rumors and the myth, I wasn't sure what to think going into this, but I did find a difference, about 17 pounds. So not as much as the rumors say with 50 to 75 pounds, but there was a difference. So what do you think? Is 17 pounds worth it for autocross, or is it not really worth it trying to find one of these kind of rare, actually, Japanese cars? So leave a comment below on what you think, if it's worth it, or maybe something I missed between the two cars, and I'll catch you next time.
See you again.